to the ITSM Practice Podcast.
Welcome to the ITSM Practice Podcast. I'm Luigi Ferri. I think many ITIL 5 foundation candidates are working much harder than they need to. Not because the exam is easy, not because the syllabus is small, because they are studying the framework in the opposite way it was designed. They study chapters. The exam tests a system, and that difference matters more than most people realize. Open any foundation book, and the structure seems straightforward. A chapter on the ITIL Value System, a chapter on the value chain, a chapter on governance, a chapter on AI capability, a chapter on product life cycle, a chapter on service lifecycle, a chapter on the 4 dimensions. It's a lot. The temptation is obvious. Read the chapter, learn the terminology, move to the next chapter, repeat. The problem is that ITIL 5 does not behave like a collection of chapters. The framework behaves like a system. Every concept depends on another concept. Every model explains another model. Every chapter is part of a larger conversation. And I suspect this is where many candidates lose marks. Not because they don't know the content, because they know the content in isolation. If I had to identify one page that matters more than any other, it would be the ITIL Value System. Not because it is the most difficult, not because it appears in the exam more than everything else, because it explains why the rest of the material exists. Once the ITIL Value System starts making sense, other parts of the framework begin to find their place. The value chain stops looking like a diagram. Governance stops looking like a definition. The 4 dimensions stop looking like a list. AI capability stops looking like a technology topic. Value creation, value delivery, and value realization start connecting. And that's exactly what candidates should be looking for during preparation. Connections, not chapters. Take the AI capability as an example. It's one of the topics attracting attention in ITIL 5. Understandably, AI is everywhere, every conference, every vendor presentation, every strategy discussion. But the interesting question is not what can AI do? The interesting questions are 2. What does AI depend on? What outcomes is AI intended to improve? Knowledge, information, governance, operating models, workflow, lifecycle management. An organization that cannot manage knowledge will struggle with AI. An organization that cannot govern decisions will struggle with AI. An organization that cannot explain how value is created will struggle with AI. The more I looked at that topic, the less it felt like a technology discussion. It felt like a service management discussion. And that's a useful lesson for the exam. Many topics that appear separate are actually connected. The same thing happens with governance. Candidates often study governance as a topic, a definition, a concept, a chapter. But governance only becomes meaningful when value, risk, priorities, or strategic direction require decision. A decision, a priority, an investment, a risk. The same applies to the product lifecycle. The same applies to the service lifecycle. The same applies to the value chain. They are not independent pieces of information. They are describing how a service moves, evolves, creates value, and improves over time. The framework becomes much easier once you stop asking, "What is this?" and you start asking, "Where does this fit?" If I had 7 days before the exam, I wouldn't spend that week reading the book again from cover to cover. I would take a service, any service, a customer portal, an onboarding service, a support service. Then I would challenge myself. Where does demand enter? How does it move through the value chain? Where does governance influence decisions? How do the 4 dimensions affect outcomes? How do product and services evolve together their life cycle? Where would the AI capability support the service? If those questions are difficult to answer, the issue is probably not memory. The issue is understanding. And understanding is what the exam rewards. The second thing I would do is use AI as a study partner, not as a shortcut, not as a source of answers, as a source of questions. Create mock exams focused on specific topics, only governance, only AI capability, only product lifecycle, only service lifecycle, only the ITIL value chain, only the value chain. The objective is not to achieve a perfect score. The objective is to identify weak areas before the exam does it for you. And finally, I will spend more time reviewing mistakes than counting correct answers. Most candidates celebrate what they know. Stronger candidates investigate what they don't know. Every incorrect answer is evidence. It reveals a misunderstanding, a gap, a connection that has not yet been made. That's a valuable information. There is one final trap. ITIL 5 uses words that sound familiar: value, service, governance, risk, improvement. Most experienced professionals have been using those words for years. The danger is assuming that they mean exactly the same thing inside the framework. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Foundation is testing whether you understand the language of ITIL 5. And every language has its own vocabulary, context, and structure. Learning the words matters. Understanding how those words connect matters more. So if you are preparing for the ITIL 5 Foundation exam, don't measure your progress by the number of chapters you have completed. Measure it by the number of connections you have understood. Can you explain how the ITIL value system relates to the value chain? Can you explain where governance fits? Can you explain how AI capability depends on knowledge, information, and operating models? Can you explain how products and services evolve through their life cycle? Can you explain how value is created, delivered, and realized? Because candidates keep studying the chapters. The exam keeps asking about the system. And the gap between those two things explains why some people work very hard and still struggle. The exam is easier than it looks once the framework becomes a system. Thank you for listening. I'm Luigi Ferri, and this was the ITSM Practice Podcast. Arrivederci.